Thank you. I'll try and keep to time.
No
This is
worries.
slightly different to what everyone's been talking about, but related nonetheless. Okay, try to work. Okay, so this is about looking at how we actually do our marking and how we provide our feedback. And it's just one of the more common routes is using individual feedback sheets, whether it be things like Turnitin or Word documents. Usually there's a kind of an individual feedback sheet for each student. Um, on reflection, what we've been kind of thinking about Helena, who's in the chat today as well, and a couple of other colleagues, is as a marker moderator, like we're just talking about, or a module lead, having multiple documents are cumbersome to work with. So you're jumping between multiple different Word documents or multiple different Turnitin screens. Individual feedback sheets do make it harder to moderate after marking and to check for consistency and completeness. So I've been an external examiner in places where sometimes you'll be looking at the Turnitin screen and you'll see like there's gaps in the feedback. And because each student's get an individual sheet, it can be hard to catch all those gaps. So it goes back to that comment earlier about consistency across their different peers. There are also individual sheets quite restrictive in the fact that the layout is predetermined before any of the marking starts. Again, just because of the way the systems work, people have to fill in the gaps, so you have to have the kind of the structure all set in stone. And one thing that's kind of really become important to us is they make it really harder for the marker to reflect on all the feedback they've given after the process unless they store it and review it in a certain fashion. And again, that really relates to a couple of things that have come up this session already. So what we've been looking at is really can we make this process more efficient? And if in case I run out of time, just the take home message is basically feedback is data, and whatever you can do with data, you can basically do with feedback. The hard part is just getting it into a usable format in the first place. So this is a bit of a story, but in kind of the process of converting all our data skills teaching to R back in 2016, we developed a process from taking a table that looks like this at the top, which is basically each row is an individual student's answer to given questions. So this would be kind of student one's answer to the first question. This would be their feedback statement they'll get, and this would be the actual input that they did, the code that they wrote. So we would take this sort of structure, one file contains all the information for all the individual students, and turn it into this sort of thing where each student gets their individual feedback sheet and they've got their individual feedback and they've got the generic feedback underneath as well. Now, the generic feedback is written after we've seen all the individual feedback and it's put directly into each individual student feedback. So any student looks at their document, they get their own answer plus their own feedback, and then they get the whole class feedback as well. So it's all contained in one place. What's nice about that is, again, it's all in the one document for all the student. The student just has to look in one place to get all that information. And because we're not actually writing the feedback sheet until after we've got all the feedback, we can actually add things to the different documents as we like. In some of the data skills things we've done, we've added maybe a histogram or some additional input that we've spotted throughout the class. You know, as you go through the first 10, 15, you start to spot things and you think, ah, it should be really good to comment on that. So instead of having to go edit all the ones you've already done, the feedback sheet gets written after and you can just add as you go. And just quickly to mention, I'm not going to show any of the R code or any of the R packagings today, but it's just say this is all done through really freely available R packages. This process works really well with code and data skills assignments, but obviously a lot of the stuff we do is essays and reports. And what we've been working on is to see if we can do a sort of similar fashion with that style of assignment. This has been a series of a few years over several iterations, and we've finally settled on an approach using Word. And this is kind of the template we've been working on up the top here, where the marker will write their name, they might add the student ID, although in more recent versions we've actually got the student ID directly in the file for the marker, so they just have to fill in the rest of the information. And then they put in maybe like the verbal descriptors as we use at Glasgow. So that'd be like excellent, very good for all the different kind of marking criteria, plus two or three feed forward comments. And again, they'll have one Word document. Each academic staff will get one Word document that has the space for all the different students contained within that Word document. So they're just working with one file. And then basically we will take that to generate the feedback sheets after. Just to mention, we tried it with Excel and people didn't like typing in Excel quite understandably. And we also tried it with plain text files, but people found them too basic and you couldn't add things like hyperlinks or additional information. But from this kind of word structure, this word document structure, we then take all that information, and this is the bit of the R code does magically in the background that we've developed. So you can see Helena's example here, where she's got the student ID, verbal descriptors, and some text. Another student down here, again, verbal descriptors. We'll run the R code on it, so we now feed it all into one large data table. And then basically from that data table, we can produce all the different feedback sheets we want to do. Okay. What's also quite nice is going back to this idea about the feedback sheets not written in stone because you've not developed it beforehand, you're developing it after the feedback's written. You can produce various different styles of feedback sheet. Both these examples here on the left and on the right come from the same sort of idea of filling in a Word document and taking it into a data table, but they produce kind of very different feedback styles. The one on the left using highlight on the verbal descriptors plus text underneath the kind of verbal descriptors. The one on the one on the left, the one on the right having the verbal descriptors at the top, and then all the comments kind of sectioned underneath. Again, it's really this idea of you've got the feedback. The feedback's the key thing. The structure of the feedback file can be adapted and generated after. What we've also started doing, and kind of going back to that comment there about moderation, is and Colin Thomas's comment there, is that because some of the students have said they actually would like to see the moderation process, we can add that to all the feedback sheets as well. Helena's done some really excellent work on how to reflect on feedback and how to deal with receiving feedback. So we've added that to some of the feedback sheets as well. And what we're starting to move towards is sort of an iterative process where the feedback updates or it contains more information or different information depending on where you are in the kind of the year. We work a lot on the MSc process. So if it's your first feedback, you might get a slightly different feedback sheet. If it's your second one, third one, etc., etc. Again, because the structure is not written in stone, we can adapt as we go along. The one thing I did want to point out, after we've got all that kind of feedback in the table, sorry, formatting's gone a wee bit funny there. We can start to do a bit of analysis on that feedback. This is just some really rough rudimentary analysis I'm going to show here, but you can do whatever really you want to do just on that idea that it is data. But one thing you can start to look at is basically the number of words per grade band. So if you've got on your figure here 6 different markers, Dr. 1, Dr. 2, Dr. 3, etc. Along the x-axis is all the different grade bands, A, B, C, D, E. Apparently I've missed out F, so going straight to G. And then kind of on the y-axis, the number of words per individual report that a marker might write. And you can start to see things like, if you look across your marking team, some markers are giving a lot of words to different bands, and some markers are giving a lot less words. The one thing we tend to focus on is, are the A students getting a good amount of feedback? I know amount is not really kind of a measure of quality, but it does kind of help us flag up any time where a marker just might write something like keep it up to the A students. A students need to know what they're doing well, just as well as kind of a C student needs how to improve. So we use this sort of technique to analyze a really rough rudimentary way of how can we make sure the feedback is of a standard that we think that will be really beneficial to students. So we can look at the number of words per grade band, and we can look at the number of words per marker to kind of think if there's a consistency across the teams as well. And you can see, even just in this quick reflection, marker number 3 is using a quite wide range across the different bands, and they're also really quite different from marker number 1. It's not that we all have to be robots, but students do compare and contrast their feedback with each other, so we need to be aware of these differences and have kind of some pedagogical reason for those differences. Again, the really one to watch out for though is the differences across bands, and it's quite common that high band students will get much less feedback and feed forward comments than lower bands, and just kind of treating the feedback as data really allows you to tackle that. There is another element we've started to look at, and it's on-script comments, and whether you agree on-script comments are good or not. This sort of approach to feedback being data has allowed us to tackle a couple of issues we've seen here. Again, 2 figures. The one on the left, this all comes from a lab report assignment. and it's about 150 students across 15 different markers. And what we've just done is a very simple extract all the number of comments per report and all the number of words per comment within those reports, and done a kind of comparison to see how would it look for different students. Number of comments per report we found ranged from 0, where the marker didn't give any comments on the report, to a minimum of 1. So across the whole 2,000, 3,000 word report, the student received 1 comment, right up to some students receiving 60 odd comments per the report. So that's quite a difference within the one module, within the one assignment, where some students get 1 comment or no comment, and other students are getting an awful lot of comments. Again, another rudimentary look is the number of words per comment. Again, right down at 0 or 1. Often you'll see the comment of a question mark, and we all know what the marker means when they write the question mark, but the student might not, and that's the point. By looking at these sort of things, we can start to establish, yeah, the student's not really going to understand that comment, so maybe we can try and address what comments we are writing. And then we found comments go right up to 145 words. So some markers like to write verbose, which might be myself, and the markers are right down at the 1, 2, 3. Again, we're not meant to be robots. We are unique and we all kind of write in different styles, but it's just being aware of it. And there's probably a lower limit of the number of words you want to write. Again, things like keep it up, question mark, I don't understand this, are very short comments that we know what we mean, but students might not. And just having this approach is kind of feedback as data allows you to really kind of think about that in a more meaningful way, I guess. I just wanted to show kind of like what's been the kind of ideology behind this, if you want, to some degree. This to us is sort of the assessment and feedback look that's very kind of, we all know, right? Lecturer and student, the student goes to the lecture series, they take the assignment from the lecturer, complete it, get some feedback, lecturer gives the feedback, student takes the feedback, develops knowledge and skill, and goes back through the cycle. And that goes on across the whole year. The bit that we've really been focusing on, and again, is maybe we need to do a lot more work on as ourselves as lecturers, is really that loop where we take our own feedback and we analyze it and think about how do we develop our skills. Often there's an awful lot of information that we have written within our feedback that will develop our assignments and our modules for the future year. And I teach a lot of statistics, and it's a really good way to kind of see what aspects the students haven't picked up well from the lectures just based on the feedback I'm giving. Students don't know what they don't know often, but just on the things that I'm writing in the feedback, I start to get a really good sense of what have they actually not picked up well. And if, again, going back to the idea of individual feedback sheets, if you're just writing each individual student a feedback sheet and sending that out to the ether, that's really hard to get a grasp of all your individual comments and feedback because you don't have it anymore. The approach we're trying to take is storing it all as data tables and analyzing it as we would if we're writing up individual reports. So really just to wrap up, and I know that's been a bit of a whirlwind, sorry, but conclusions. Designing the feedback sheets after the feedback written allows us great flexibility. It allows additional supportive materials to be included in one place, and the structure can be adapted to what's the most beneficial for students, right? You learn as you go in the marking process, and you'll see things that you would never have thought of prior to actually starting the marking. If your marking sheet or your feedback sheet is predetermined, it's really hard to get that information in front of the student without having multiple kind of different comments and feedback sheets all over the place. If your feedback sheet is written after the feedback is created, it becomes a lot more easier. Again, there's that idea of progressive feedback. So as the student progresses throughout the year, you can actually adapt the feedback sheet because you know what the original feedback was. Just to comment on that, you know what their feedback was in a different assignment. To comment on that, we do obviously use anonymous blind marking, but because it's all GUID is Glasgow terminology, it's all based on the student ID number. That's obviously just a number that can be matched across different data tables through whatever system, so you can match up their feedback across their different assignments. I haven't really presented any data here, but anecdotal feedback from the staff, or when we've asked them about this process, they have found it really beneficial to have all the feedback in one place. If you're marking 150 students, you know a lot of the comments are going to be similar across different places. So having all that feedback makes it much easier, much more manageable and efficient to make sure you're actually kind of getting the feedback to each individual student and to create a level of consistency. It also buys you a bit of time just because you're reducing the amount of documents you're working with. You're just working with one Word document, so it's all there in that one place. So staff have been much more appreciative of the Word document version than they have of the other versions we've generated. And the final thing, really, and again, if you get nothing from this, is just really that idea that the feedback and feed forward should always be informative to staff as well as students, right? Like formative assignments were created in the sense that it tells the staff or the teacher about where the students are, not so much about where the students are to themselves. And I think somewhere we may forget that the feedback comments we're writing are really informative to ourselves as teachers, and we need to take that on and be more reflective. However you do that is great. We just think this process really works really nicely to help generate the feedback for the class and at a later stage to help develop our own teaching. And just lastly, all the code is available if people do want to try this stuff out. Please just drop me an email. The only reason it's not open publicly yet, and it will be available one day on GitHub, is just I haven't had time to create anonymous versions of it. So it's all contained, but it has all our student IDs on it. I will create an anonymous version, and if you want to try out the codes, I can easily send you one that would work for you. So more than happy to help people if they do want to try it out. And I think that is me.
Thanks very much, Phil. Thanks for that great talk. Um, we have a few questions in the chat, which I can read out a couple to you, but if anyone has any other questions, please feel free to ask away. So you did mention this a bit at the end of your talk, Phil, but someone asked, Sarah asked about how the whole process was received by staff.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I think it varies. Every staff likes their own process, right? Some people in our department like to use Turnitin just because they're really used to it and it does some of the stuff they like to do. The ones that do like to use kind of feedback sheets, like Word feedback sheets, have found it really beneficial just for that idea of having all the comments for each student in the one place and just using one document. It's found it actually, now that we've actually started putting the student IDs into the Word documents for staff, one staff member commented it now feels like we're in 2025, thankfully, which I thought was quite nice. It was good, nice feedback, you know. So, yeah, they've had found it really useful, really beneficial, and I think just not having to jump between all the different feedback sheets. I think as a program lead, it's really beneficial to me, and as a moderator, it's really beneficial to me because I can see everything in the one place from each marker. I can see where the gaps are. I can see where kind of like they've missed out comments, or I can see where perhaps the feed forward comments are not as informative as they might be, and we can ask the staff to go back and reflect it. So it's a kind of a training tool for staff. It's really beneficial as well.
Awesome, thanks, Phil. And Anki's got a question if you wanted to come in to ask that.
Hi, I'm Anke Puttner. I'm from the University of Birmingham, and my question is about, you keep saying that it's really useful to have the feedback sheet being adaptable, not set in stone, not being predetermined. But one of the things that I've been thinking about hearing this is that doesn't that create uncertainty for the students about what's coming, or a sense of the feedback being like brought out of the blue? So our students basically get the marking criteria and the look of the feedback sheets in advance so that they know what's coming. And so what you're saying seems to be like not being able to show the students in advance. So can you explain to me your
Yeah.
reasoning there?
So the only thing I wouldn't show in advance, me personally, is what the actual individual feedback sheet will look like. What we'll tell them is they'll get feedback on the different marking criteria. They'll get comments on feed forward, things to take forward to their next assignment. But the actual layout of the feedback sheet, like it will look exactly like this. That will be the one thing we don't send them out. We'll Again, it's just because there's that flexibility where if we realized halfway through the semester last year that actually having the moderation information within the feedback sheet was really beneficial, we always thought students didn't want to see the moderation bit, but they actually do. So I can now take the feedback sheet and add the moderation part. So yeah, just to clarify that for the recording and to yourself, sorry, is that we will always prior, we have within our school what's called assessment information sheets, and that will give the students all the information about the assessment and what feedback they will receive and how they're going to get that feedback. But just the actual structure of the feedback sheet itself will be the bit that we generate after the process. Does that make some sense? Sorry.
That makes perfect sense. Thank you. And that's much clearer. And I like this idea of being able to be responsive about, for example, the moderation information.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks for asking that. It's really good to clarify that point. Yeah, all the information about how what feedback they will get does go out in France. It's just literally the structure of it.